when we broke away from Great Britain, we came to America, but there was a time frame there where we're still under British control or English control. You guys understand that? Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about the types of colonies that we had while we were under English control, and basically how they were structured, like who was in charge, who done it. You know what I mean? Like how they ran things. Okay. After we do that, we're going to talk about a couple of landmark English documents that we use to influence the U.S. Constitution. And then lastly, we're going to talk about basically just the influence that England had on what we did. Okay, so this is probably stuff you've heard at some point or another. You just probably haven't heard it put quite the way we're going to put it. All right? Mm-hmm. So, that being said, your notes are a little bit different, I think. You all don't have... do we have to write these out? No, they're matching. I want us to write them down simply because I think you learn them better that way. Okay? The first two here, actually the first three, we're not going to put any of these down yet because we're going to get to them throughout the notes. But we're going to talk about limited government. You guys should know what a limited government is. It's one where the government can't do everything, right? They're limited because who gives them power to do things? You guys know that? Who gives the government power to do things?
The people.
The people. So they're limited because of us, right?
The democracy.
And then obviously a representative government is when we elect people to run a government for us. And then it gets into some of the documents, okay? Like the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights, okay? So there are, however, a few definitions that I want us to jot down because if you don't know what they mean, then talking about these documents aren't going to matter. So somewhere on that paper in your Google Doc, write down the word due process. Okay?
You want us to do it on the doc?
Yeah, these are your notes. Like this is what you need to do to understand what we're talking about. So you can do it on the doc, you can write it, you can do it ever how you want to do it. We'll go as far as answering the questions here in a moment on it, but I'm going to add some things to it, if that makes any sense. So, your book definition says due process is your protection against the unjust taking of life, liberty, or property. Now, we're going to shorten all that up, okay, and put it in today's terms. Due process, guys, beside of that, I would just simply write it's your legal rights. Now, what do I mean by that? Your legal rights. Somebody give me a hand on it. I'm not talking about when you're arrested and the police officer is reading your rights. I'm not talking about your right to remain silent. This is kind of part of it, of your due process.
All right.
Okay, look at it like this. If you were arrested, can a county put you in jail for 6 months before they decide to let you go to court? They cannot. You have the right to a speedy trial. You guys got me? Mm-hmm. You also have the right to a fair trial. For example, if, say, Titus and myself get in a fight after school, Titus just beats me up, hurts me pretty bad. I sue Titus. He shows up to court, and 10 of the 12 people in the jury are related to me. Has Titus got a fair trial in that situation? Mm-hmm. No. You have the right to a fair trial. Due process is your legal right, okay? While we're on the topic of due process, there are 2 amendments that I would like for you to jot down beside of where you put a legal right. Put your legal rights. In parentheses, write down the 5th and the 14th Amendment. Now, hopefully, when you wrote that down, you're thinking, well, why is there 2 amendments that deal with one thing? Well, it's very simple. We have a dual court system. We have a federal court system. We have a state court system, right? Your 5th Amendment is your due process at the national level of government. 14th Amendment gives you due process at the state level, okay? So, due process is extremely important. You don't need due process, guys, until you get in trouble. Then you better hope you get it. You better hope you know what it is so you're not taking advantage of it. All right? Is everybody with me so far? Okay. We're going to skip petitioner right and English Bill of Rights for right now because we'll add those here in a little while. These, however, I want us to jot down. Okay, so the first one there is you have the word charter. Now, what do you think I mean by the word charter? Not by chartering a boat or anything of that nature, but in old colonial times, a charter put down that it's a written grant from the king. So basically, you're getting permission from the king to be a certain type of colony. Okay, so a charter is a written grant or written permission.
So, like, I need to get a charter from you to get permission to hunt on your land.
Yeah, and we can dumb it down even more. You've got to get a charter from me to go to the bathroom. See what I'm getting at? Like, when we were under colonial rule, the king ruled 95% of everything going on in the colonies, which ended up being the worst thing because he was so far away. You guys get me? But if you wanted to be considered a colony while we were still under British rule, the king either approved or denied it. Okay? So, a charter is a written grant from the king. Simple enough. All right, we're actually going to skip to the very bottom one. Next, write down the word unicameral. Now, una in math means how many? One. Cameral in government means houses. So if something's unicameral, it has how many houses?
One house.
It has one. So put down one house legislature. What I mean by that is the legislative branch has one house. Okay?
One house legislature?
One house legislature. It's up there on the notes. Okay? Now, common sense should kick in sometime. If unicameral means one house, then bicameral would mean how many?
Two.
Would mean two houses.
Which one do we have?
Yeah, what do we have in America?
We have a tricameral.
We do not.
We have bicameral.
We have a bicameral. Our
Oh.
Congress has two houses, the Senate and House of Representatives. So, again, that is a legislature. Okay, now all this is important because when we get into talking about these different types of colonies, some of them have a unicameral, some of them have a bicameral legislature, and you're going to have to be able to tell them apart. Okay? And then that one in the middle, proprietary, we're going to get into it here in a second, but I will tell you the definition now because it's kind of important. Is a name given to a colony organized and governed according to the will of a proprietor. That means that that's a person granted land and authority by the king. Okay? So it's someone that's obviously in the favor of the king. All right. So those pretty much make sense thus far. Y'all with me there? Okay.
You said we don't write that down yet?
You know, because we're going to talk about proprietary and stuff like that here in a minute. Okay. So this one is the ideas and traditions influenced through the English colonies. It says English customs and ideas about government, including the idea of order government, a limited government, and a representative government. If you'll go ahead and look back up at the paper where you've got number 1, number 2, and number 3. Y'all see up there at the top?
Yeah.
Start with number 2, okay? And what it says a limited government in number 2 is. We might as well go ahead and jot that down, okay? We'll go from the top. So, your book definition for a limited government is the idea that the government is restricted in what it may do and that every individual has certain rights that the government cannot remove. We're going to shorten that a lot, okay? So underneath number 2, where it says limited government, just simply put down that the government can only do what the people allow. The government can only do what the people allow. Yes. The government can only do what the people allow.
I swear I can't type today.
All right. The government can only do what the people allow. Now, guys, don't get me wrong. Does the government do things on a daily basis that makes people mad? I'm
Why
sure they
again?
do. But if they upset enough people in the actions that they are taking, what will we do come November every 4 years, every year for that matter? Vote somebody in that we feel like will do what we want them to do, right? So we're technically their boss. So they better be doing what we want them to do. Okay? Everybody with me thus far? All right. So limited government means that the government is not all powerful. Do we still have limited government in effect today in America? I know we're talking about colonial times here, but do we still have it in America now?
Yeah.
Okay, we do. All right. And then the next one in number 3, a representative government. Again, your book definition, it says the idea that the government should both serve and be guided by the will of the people. Now, we're going to change that up a little bit because I feel like the definition that I'm about to give you makes it a lot easier. Okay? So, beside of a representative government, the word representative kind of gives it away. How does a representative become part of the government? How do they get that job?
Represents them.
Through what? How do I get to become a governor or a senator or a delegate or a representative? I have to win a what? I have to win an election in order to do that, right? So, a representative government is when the people, and this is how I would put it, the people elect, and I'd underline or bold the word elect, when the people elect office holders. Okay? So when we elect office holders to run the government for us.
When people elect what?
Office holders to run the government for us. And basically what I mean by that is an indirect democracy, right? We talked about that in chapter 1.
Office holders to. Is that all you said was when people elect office
When
holders?
people elect office holders to run the government for us. Okay?
So everything that Northam tried to do, was it something, was that like?
What do you mean what he tried to do? Governor Northam?
You know like how everybody was very, and,
With the Second Amendment rally? Yeah, there was he was trying to get some laws through General Assembly that a lot of people, gun owners, didn't find to benefit them. So they went to protest what he was trying to do.
Alright, so what stops that from actually passing through?
Well, the hope is you take those representatives, like we elect delegates to the General Assembly for us. Okay, like Morgan Griffith is one. He's around. He actually comes in quite a bit. Like when we play sports, he mails you guys newspaper clippings. When your picture's in the paper, puts like congratulations on it, things of that nature. But like he represents basically Carroll County, Grayson, Smith, this area. And if he feels a lot of people in this area think that law is going against like a value that they have, then he'll speak up and vote no on it. Does that make sense? But if he goes in and we're, like if we have a representative, and we'll learn about this when we talk about the Electoral College, if one representative's area, their region, wants something done and their representative votes the other way, it's made public knowledge how they vote. So you can be like, if he runs again for an election, you're like, well, man, all of us wanted this and you voted for this. Why? They have to kind of explain themselves. So, but that's the idea. That's how we get people in that will do what we want them to do if the ones we've elected won't. Okay? All right. So is everybody good on limited government and representative? Again, we'll come back to an ordered one later. I just don't want to jump into that just yet. Okay? All right. So back to what we were talking about. We're going to talk about some historical documents. Your notes only have us list about 3 of them, okay? And these are English documents. So my question is this to you all, and I want you to think about it as we go through the process of talking about the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. Why would a country of people, and I'm referring to the colonies, why would we use any type of British anything once we gained our freedom to set up our government?
Because that's all we know.
That's exactly right. When we broke, England's the only thing we ever know, right? There's no internet at this point in time. There's no telephones. You can't communicate with people around the world. So literally, the only government most of the colonial people knew was England's. And then they had one other piece of intelligence that was very important to them. They also knew that how England had set their government up was something that they didn't want. Because if they didn't want it, why did we break away from them in the beginning, right? So we had those two pieces of paper. So what we're going to do, guys, in number 4, 5, and 6 on your paper there, we're going to go through these documents and we're going to jot down a little bit of information, okay, and basically explain why these documents were used to help write our government, okay?
You jot it down on a computer or jot it down on paper?
I'll keep doing it while you're doing it. I'm jotting it down on paper for the virtual people so they can fill theirs out as we go, okay? Lastly, let's go ahead and do the order of government. Beside ordered government, it said that local government should be divided into units and ruled by officers. Guys, just put down that government is divided into units beside of ordered government. That's the first one. You're not going to see that anymore, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it.
Government is divided what?
In units, divided into units.
One thing you probably should know about this like Google Docs thing, like whenever you transfer it over into Google Docs,
Yes.
it like bunches up.
You got to kind of spread it back out.
But you got to spread it back out.
Yeah. Well, if you guys would want to type on it, y'all can do that. All right. So the first one we're going to deal with, and I think it's actually the first one that's on your paper, number 4, the Magna Carta. Okay. Now, the Magna Carta, if you will notice in the notes on the board, says that it was written or signed into effect when?
1215.
It was signed into effect in the year 1215. When did we become a nation and set up? When did the Constitution? We gained our independence in 1776, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution didn't go into effect until about 1787. Okay, so from 1215 to 1787, I'm not a math guy, but that's about 500 years, right? Give or take.
507.
Right.
Yeah.
So, why on earth are we referring to a document that's centuries old for what we're trying to set up? Apparently, he had some really good points in it, right? So, first thing I'd like for you to know about the Magna Carta is the year that it was created, and we'll just jot down 1215, okay? I don't think I ask you that on a test or quiz. I just feel like it's important you know kind of the time frame, okay? So, 1215, the Magna Carta goes into effect. The first thing it says is that it was created by English barons, which is kind of similar to what we have in Congress, you know what I mean? To put limits on the once absolute power of the king. Now read that carefully. To put limits on the once absolute power of the king. So the Magna Carta created which one of those top 3 ideas that we just talked about? An ordered government, a limited government, or yeah, it created a limited government. So I would jot that down first. The Magna Carta created a limited government. It limited the power of the king, okay? Meaning he could only do certain things, all right? This next part is also intriguing. It says that it guaranteed certain fundamental rights for the privileged, such as trial by jury and due process of law. Now, you guys just learned due process is your what? Your legal what?
Right.
Your legal rights. So the Magna Carta done 2 other things. Put down that it created a trial by jury. Do we still have trial by jury?
Yep.
Yes. And you guys not knowing that's kind of a good thing, meaning you've not been in much trouble. So you got trial by jury, and then you got due process. So what the Magna Carta essentially done was took the idea of the king being the judge, jury, and executioner away from it. Does that make sense? You're going to get a trial by jury, and you're going to have due process now. The king is not absolute control. Well, if you think about all 3 of those concepts, and I will ask you, what did the Magna Carta give us? It gave us limited government, it gave us trial by jury, and it gave us due process. We still have those in effect to this day. Okay? So that's a very big deal. So that's the Magna Carta. Does that make sense? Everybody with me thus far? Okay. The next English document that helped write what? We're talking about these because they helped us write our what?
Constitution.
The U.S. Constitution. The second one is called the Petition of Right. Okay? The Petition of Right. Now, this was a document that was signed by King Charles I, and the year was 1628. So we're actually getting a little bit closer to colonial times at this point. And this thing also done three things that we really enjoy having within our constitutional rights. Okay? First one said it banned the king from imprisoning or punishing people without first following the laws of the land. So, it banned them from putting people in jail before they had due process, right? We don't have to write that part down. But I'll give you this much. You know where that comes into the Constitution? The Eighth Amendment. You have the right to not have cruel and unusual punishment. You guys with me? So, yeah, that's a big deal. So, technically, a cop can't come up and just smack you because he wants to. I know you guys are sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute. What's that? Legally, they can't do that. The Eighth Amendment came from that idea. Okay? The next two is the ones I want us to write down. The Petition of Right kept the king from declaring military rule in times of peace, making people house soldiers. So let's jot that down. And you can shorten it any way you want to, but you had no military rule during times of peace. Okay? No military rule during times of peace. Now this is important how this is worded. Okay? Now get this. I just told you the Eighth Amendment protects us against cruel and unusual punishment. We've talked a little bit about the First Amendment in here. Your Freedom Amendment, speech, press, religion, petition, that sort of thing. You all know what the Second Amendment is because you hear it on the news all the time, and it's your right to bear arms, right?
Wait, Bill.
What's your Third Amendment? You never, ever, ever hear anybody talking about the Third Amendment. And I just told you what it was, you didn't even know it. That people do not have to house soldiers during a time of peace. Now, don't get me wrong here. If a civil war, if someone invaded America and our military needed to get somewhere to stop this problem, and they needed to take over your home and make it like a headquarters or a makeshift hospital or something. Obviously I'm talking, this would be a really weird situation, right? But they have the right, like, listen, we're taking over because we need it. They could do that during a time of conflict. Does that make sense? But like as of right now, if they said, hey, we're taking this over, you know, I'm saying, pay up. You know what I mean? Or do whatever. They can't just come in and take over. So no military rule during times of peace. Okay? And then the last one here is the most important one. I'd put a star beside of this one. When it comes to the Petition of Right, it says it required the consent of Parliament for taxation. And that's how I don't know how to shorten that. You guys know what the word consent means? When you give your consent, what are you giving?
Your permission.
Your permission. So basically, the king had to get permission from who to tax?
The people.
From Parliament, right?
Yeah.
So you had to get consent from Parliament to tax. Consent from Parliament to tax. Get this, if President Trump wanted to enact a tax today on something, could he just randomly go out and do it?
No.
Guess who he's got to ask?
Senate.
Senate and House of Representatives.
We said
Which is
consent
common.
from Parliament.
Parliament to tax. So the king just couldn't go out and say, hey, you owe me this amount for tax money, this guy owes me this amount. It all had to be approved. Okay? We took both of those ideas, and actually all three of those ideas, and put them into our Constitution with the Eighth Amendment, the Third Amendment, and then obviously getting consent to tax. All right? Everybody straight with the Petition of Right? So far, so simple?
Yeah.
All right. Lastly here, skip it. Oh, the English Bill of Rights. Now, do you find it coincidental that the English had a Bill of Rights and we also have a Bill of Rights? You guys got an idea where the concept that we have came from? England, right? So you got the English Bill of Rights. This one's a little bit newer. It happened in 1689. Okay? So what concepts did we steal from this idea, or this document, that would help us write our Constitution? Now you're going to notice a couple of those we've already written down. Like, for example, it says requires consent of Parliament for taxation and the suspension of laws. Well, didn't the Petition of Right make us get permission from Parliament to tax? So we don't really need to write that one down. Then it says promise the right to a fair trial and petition the monarchy to correct injustices. So you got due process there again. You guys with me? So again, we've already got those written down. We don't need to write it anymore. So what did we take from the English Bill of Rights that was so important? If you look up there where it's got the date, it says the English Bill of Rights was drawn up by Parliament to prevent what?
Abuse of power.
Exactly. So put down to prevent the abuse of power. Now, again, the only reason we're talking about these is how it affected the U.S. Constitution. So to prevent the abuse of power, how do we use that in today's America? What do we have a system of that prevents the abuse of power by anybody? Y'all should know this.
Government.
System of checks and
Balance.
balances. If I were to ask you, in our branches, in the executive, legislative, and the judicial, of those three, which one has the most power? What would you tell me?
Legislative.
Okay, Zane thinks the legislative. Anybody else? What do you think, Myers? Of those three, which one do you think would have the most power? Most people would say executive because it's the president, right? Kind of rules things. All those answers, I could see why you would say any of them. If the judicial, they interpret laws, right? But here's the kicker. They all have equal power. And we've done that on purpose. We made all of them have the ability to check on the other one to make sure they wasn't abusing their power. For example, when Congress makes a bill and tries to turn it into law, who has to sign that bill before it becomes a law? The president, right? If the president goes and approves a judge somewhere, guess who has to approve his appointments before it actually goes into effect? Congress, right? If the president does something that violates the Constitution, if he does something they deem unconstitutional, the Supreme Court calls him out on it and he could be impeached. If you guys remember, didn't we have an impeachment trial for Mr. President Trump?
Yep.
Yeah. They found him to do something that violated the Constitution. Okay? They couldn't prove, well, one house impeached him, the other one didn't. So the other one house didn't feel like he needed to be gone. But the fact of the matter is, they can all check on one another. So they're all equal. So by making them have equal power, you prevent the abuse of it. Is everybody with me on that? Anybody confused? So this makes sense? All right. So it says the chart compares the rights of the ones we just talked about with the Virginia Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution. Now, I'm not going to show you this chart, but I am going to mention a couple other documents to you that had a huge influence on how we wrote the Constitution. But you don't have to jot these down. I just like making reference to them. I used to make you write them down, but we don't have time to do that. You guys ever heard of the Virginia chart or the charters of the Virginia Company of London? Y'all know what it did? It gave colonists the same rights as Englishmen. It created a kind of equality aspect of things. Obviously, the Declaration of Independence was huge for our Constitution. It's the one that granted our freedoms from the King, right? Declared our independence from England. The Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was a model for our Bill of Rights, big deal. The Articles of Confederation, which was our first form of government, and then the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom was also a big one because people left and came to the colonies because they wanted what? Religious freedom, right? But again, we don't have to put all those down. I don't need you to know all those, okay? So does anybody have any questions about those three documents? You will need to know what they did. So we good on that point? Okay, so let's get into the 13 colonies. This is going to answer number 7, number 8, and number 9. Okay? It says how were royal, proprietary, and charter colonies governed. So we're basically going to fill out the structure of what they were, and then you'll be able to figure the questions out pretty simply. Okay? So, again, when we were established, the colonies were established over a period of about 125 years. The first one you guys should know. What was the first colony?
Virginia.
Virginia. That happened around 1607. Georgia being the last one. Okay? Now, the 13 colonies, guys, you guys know that we eventually break away from England. We go from the 13 colonies to the United States, and we get rid of the Articles of Confederation. Okay? I'm talking about the time frame that the 13 colonies were under English rule. You guys with me? That's what we're talking about today. So we're way before us breaking away and gaining our independence. Okay? It says the similarities among the colonies ultimately outweighed their differences. So each colony was established on the basis of a charter granted by the king. These charters granted some governing authority to the colonies and kept some for the king. Now you're going to notice as we go through this the buildup of why we start hating, I shouldn't say hating, the reason that we start disliking the way the English is ruling. Okay? Because you guys got to think about something. There's a king sitting in England, which is literally 3,000 miles away from the colonies, and he's supposedly telling us how we should live. Well, you guys know as well as I do, if your boss is 3,000 miles away, are you going to work as hard as what you probably should?
No.
No. I can walk out of this room. Coach DeHaven and I can walk out of this room. One of you is going to do something stupid. Right? I mean, that's just... that's just how people think. A teacher's not in here, I can get away with it, right? So we start kind of doing things our own way and obviously make some people mad, and this kind of leads us into the Revolutionary War, so to speak. All right? So, again, we're going to go through these colonies, how they're structured, and hopefully it'll make a lot of sense for you. Okay? So, I can't make that picture of the colonies any bigger because of the way I'm showing it to you on my board. But there are 3 types. You have the 3 types written on your paper: royal, proprietary, and charter. The green colonies, which is the vast majority of the colonies in 1775. When did we gain our independence? 1776. So the vast majority of these colonies are what we call a royal colony. We're going to talk about what it is. Pennsylvania and, Coach, what is that one? I can't read. Maryland?
Yeah.
Maryland, they are considered proprietary colony, and then you got Connecticut, correct, Coach, and Rhode Island? Rhode Island and Connecticut. They are considered what we call charter colonies. So, when I ask you, in 1775, the vast number of colonies consisted of what type of colony, you would tell me a royal, okay? Because that's what they are. So, let's talk about these. What are they? So, the first one we got is a royal colony. So this is number 7. Okay? What is the characteristics of a royal colony? The first thing up there says that the governor of a royal colony is appointed by who? The king. So that's what I would jot down. A governor that's appointed by the king. Well, you guys should know which king I'm referring to. Do we have a king in the 13 colonies? No. So this king is the king of England, and this should also give you an idea about voting. Is there any type of voting? Does it look like is there any type of voting going on in royal colonies? No, because the governor got his job how? He's appointed, right? King said, you don't deal with this. I'm 3,000 miles away. You deal with it. Okay, so the governor is appointed by the king. It says the second aspect of a royal colony is the upper house of the legislature is also appointed by the king and served as the colony's highest court. The lower house was elected. Oh, we do have a little bit of voting rights here by colonists who owned enough property to vote. Now we can read both of those statements and gain a lot of information from it. Earlier I made you write down definitions for unicameral and bicameral, right? In a royal colony, do they have a legislature that's 1 house or 2 houses?
2.
So that would be unicameral or bicameral. That would be bicameral. So the next thing I would jot down underneath rural colony is that it has a bicameral legislature. Now, we need to jot this down. It's 2 houses, so I would draw me a little arrow from bicameral. I'd put upper house, or upper is appointed. Okay? The upper house is appointed while the lower house is elected. Now, are they letting everybody vote in a royal colony?
Upper house is what?
Is appointed by the king. While the lower house, the colonists are getting to vote who makes up the lower house. But is all the colonists able to vote? No, it's simply the ones that own enough property to do so. All right?
I'm lost.
Where'd you get lost at?
I said
We have a bicameral legislature in a royal colony. You got that part, right?
upper house is appointed by the king.
Okay. Then the lower house is elected by certain colonists.
Okay.
And those colonists being the ones who own enough land to be able to vote. You with me now?
Rich white males.
Yeah. Rich white dudes. All right. Now, the very last part says that the governor has to approve all laws. Now, if we look at every aspect of a royal colony, who is in control of everybody that lives in those colonies? The king, right? Because let's say the lower house, the people that are elected by colonists, decide they want to pass a law that may help every colonist there. Who has to approve it before it goes into effect? A governor who's appointed by who? The king. So that could be a problem, right? That's not good. So with a royal colony, basically the king appoints a governor, the governor approves all laws, and you have a bicameral legislature where the lower house is elected. Is everybody with me on that? Simple enough. All right. The next type of colony we had while we were under British rule in the colonies is proprietary, and it's up there at the top. If you're going to write it down, that's already in your notes. So, proprietary colony. Now, does anybody know what a proprietor is, or what we call a proprietor? A proprietor, at this point in time, guys, is anybody who owns a massive amount of land. Now, how does this individual acquire such a massive amount of land? Simply put, it was probably given to him by the king. Okay? So this proprietor is going to be someone who likes the king. You guys with me? So, underneath proprietor, we're simply going to change one word from the top, and it's going to be very similar. Instead of the governor being appointed by a king, like it was in a royal colony, who gets to appoint the governor in a proprietary colony? The proprietor. So, the person who owns all the land, or the majority of the land, gets to appoint a governor. Now, guys, use common sense. If the king grants a proprietor a lot of land, and then that proprietor gets to appoint who runs this colony, are all three of them going to be of like-mindedness? Are they going to think the same way? Yeah. They all like one another. The king appointed them, right? So, these colonies are ran just like a royal colony. Y'all see that next part? So what type of legislature do we have in a proprietary colony? Unit or bicameral?
Bicameral.
We have a bicameral legislature. Now, this one does have an accept process, okay? You're going to find out as we go through all three of these colonies that 12 of the 13 of them are bicameral. There is only one that is not. And the one that is not is Pennsylvania. It is a unicameral legislature. The reason they bring Pennsylvania up during this is because it is a type of a proprietary colony. I will ask you that question on a test or quiz. I will say, which is the only colony under British rule that had a unicameral legislature? And you would tell me it's which one. Not everybody at one time.
Say it one more time, I was about lost.
Pennsylvania is the only colony that has a unicameral legislature. The other 12 colonies have a bicameral legislature. So if I were to ask you the only one that didn't, it would be Pennsylvania. And if I were to ask you what type of colony it was, you would tell me that it's a proprietary one. Is everybody with me? So if you need to jot down Pennsylvania under that, I would do so. Okay? The proprietary colony, guys, and a royal colony are exactly the same. The only difference is the governor is appointed by the proprietor instead of the king in a proprietary colony. Y'all with me? We about through it. We about there, okay? Last one is a charter colony. Now again, you guys were told a charter is a grant permission, a grant of authority, right? Who writes charters?
King.
The king, okay? So a charter colony, this one is the one that kind of started all the problems, okay? It says a governor in a charter colony is elected by property owning colonists and that lack veto power. So the first thing I like for you to jot down there is the governor, he's not appointed here, he's what? He's elected. Emphasis on the word elected. All right? The governor is elected. The next dot says the elected bicameral legislature could pass laws without the approval of the king. So, we have a bicameral legislature, right? Meaning that our legislative branch has how many houses? 2, correct? Because all of them have 2, but Pennsylvania. So you got a bicameral legislature that is what? Appointed or elected? Both are elected. Both houses are elected. See a difference in how a charter is different than a proprietary and a royal one so far? The colonists are getting to make decisions on who runs the things, okay? And then the last thing I want you to put here is that they enjoyed the most freedoms. So guys, you can only imagine how this looks. You've got these 2 charter colonies, and if we go back in our notes and look, the 2 charter colonies, the purple ones is Connecticut and Rhode Island. There's not a lot of people living in that area, right? Those are smaller areas. But they're getting to do things that the people that's living in royal and proprietary colonies aren't allowed to do, right? So the fairness aspect starts to kick in, and they're like, well, wait a minute. They're getting to do it, but we're not. How do we go about becoming a charter colony? So you start getting these revolts. You know what I'm saying? And it leads us into some issues with the crown. Like, for example, you guys ever heard of the Boston Tea Party? The Boston Massacre, Stamp Act, and all that good stuff? You know, all that starts going into place because we want more freedoms. We like the idea of having more freedom. Okay? So tomorrow when you guys roll in, we're going to start talking about how we gained our independence through governmental means. All right? But does anybody have any questions as far as this goes? Does this make sense to you guys? You'll have a quiz on Wednesday, the day we're out. That'll be on Section 1 and Section 2 of this quiz on this chapter that you'll have to submit to me through Google. So we need to make sure we got it. So we good here? All right. That's all I got as far as notes go today. All right.